Okay. So I always like to start with this slide that, there we are, yay, just thinking about Burnaby's geography, right? So Burnaby is kind of shaped like a bowl, like a big basin. So at the center of Burnaby we have, Burnaby Lake and Deer Lake, and then we have a fairly steep hill up toward Capitol Hill and the Heights and along where Hastings Street is, and then a sharp drop off to Burrard Inlet. And then on the other side, we again have a fairly steep slope up to the Kingsway Ridge, and then a more gradual decline in toward the Fraser River and kind of a wetter area in the area known as Big Bend or the Flats, and then down toward the Fraser River. So Burnaby's geography really, this is part of the reason why we have all of those transportation routes, all of those roads that go from east to west. So even Kingsway Ridge begins as a First Nations trail. There were Aboriginal people who used that route for thousands of years, and also traveled through Central Valley east to west for thousands of years. So it is not a coincidence that that settlers started traveling along those same routes, and that same kind of east-west transportation route through Burnaby is partly informed by geography, but of course by other things as well. And that geography also shaped kind of early resource extraction too. So these are a couple of archaeological items. So as I mentioned, there was a presence of First Nations people. There continues to be a population of First Nations people in Burnaby, and it was a traditional home of Coast Salish peoples for thousands of years. And these particular items were found on the land that is now the Burnaby Village Museum. So we know that for thousands of years people were coming there to hunt. So the projectile points, this type of thing, suggests hunting for game. There was a population of large elk that lived in the Central Valley, and the other tool could be for pounding like an adze into wood to split wood for constructing things out of cedar, or it could also be for processing things like cranberries. We had extensive thinking about that geography. There was wetlands in central Burnaby and wetlands along the Fraser River that had large cranberry bogs that people would come to harvest as well. And those were found by the Hill family on their property in 1894. And managed to find their way to the Burnaby Village Museum collection many years later. And we also talked about the lakes earlier on. So this is a very early sketch of Burnaby Lake from 1860, and so of course the mainland of British Columbia becomes a colony in 1858, and the Royal Engineers are sent. They live in New Westminster, which is the first kind of capital of British Columbia, and they're interested in surveying the land. They build North Road. They build other transportation routes in the area, and they start to hear from First Nations people that there's a large freshwater lake nearby. So Colonel Moody, who's in charge of the Royal Engineers there, sends his secretary, Robert Burnaby, to go and check out this lake with a group of First Nations guides. So they travel up the Brunette River to Burnaby Lake, and Moody names the lake Burnaby Lake after Robert Burnaby. Robert Burnaby doesn't stick around, but later on, when Burnaby is incorporated as a municipality, they name the community Burnaby after the lake. So we're not exactly named after Robert Burnaby. We're named after the lake that was named after Robert Burnaby. But that's kind of that little piece of how Burnaby got its name. And this is one of the. Well, he found it and he sketched it. Yeah. Well, he found it. People who knew where it was took him there, and then that's kind of. Then they began traveling to the lake. Actually, I think that first map shows. So there becomes this little trail that is followed fairly regularly by people who want to go and visit the lake. And again, this was well known by First Nations people who would use the trail or use the Brunette River to come to Burnaby Lake. And there were canoes that people would find later on either end of the lake, so that because people would leave the canoe travel across and then continue on to Burrard Inlet. So it's again one of those examples where for thousands of years people are traveling east to west through central Burnaby, just like we do when we're commuting today. The Royal Engineers also surveyed lots, so we see Burnaby here, Burnaby Lake. This is North Road, and the first lot to be preempted is right here, lot number 1, which was preempted by a man named William Holmes. So it's sort of a different view of Burnaby. So you can imagine having North Road there and having the Brunette River, which is this well-established transportation route, being close to New Westminster. That was prime real estate in 1860, that little piece of land. The next kind of important thing that happens in Burnaby is the construction of an interurban railway. So there's a few settlers who come in the 1860s and 1870s and 1880s, but not very many. There definitely are people who are speculating, though, who are acquiring property thinking that Burnaby is going to grow. And then in 1891, there is it's kind of amazing to think of an electric railway built in 1891, but there's an electric railway built not to serve Burnaby, but to move people between Vancouver and New Westminster. And that railway, of course, goes through Burnaby in 1891. And we can kind of see its path coming from Vancouver. In terms of where it travels in Burnaby, up until about here, it pretty much follows the route that the Expo Line SkyTrain runs through today. So it really establishes this route through Burnaby, and sort of not exactly parallel to Kingsway, but close to Kingsway. It follows that route. So it comes through Burnaby to the intersection of Kingsway and Edmonds, and then it goes down Edmonds, straight down Edmonds, and it takes a wide curve and goes down, what's the street? 6th Street. Goes down 6th Street into New Westminster. And if you travel through that intersection today, the road still isn't like this. It's a wide curve that would have accommodated the interurbans and the streetcars. So why does it go along Edmonds? Why doesn't it kind of, because eventually they change the route and it goes down and sweeps into New Westminster, down 12th Street, which would later become Kingsway, right? Down 12th Street, but the hill is too steep, and then they build another route where it curves down Connaught Hill into New Westminster. But it follows along Edmonds because there's a man named Henry Edmonds, isn't there? And Henry Edmonds is one of those early land speculators. So he buys a bunch of land in the area we now know as Edmonds. And he also is a shareholder in the Westminster and Vancouver Tramway Company. So not coincidentally, the railway comes through his property. And unfortunately, the Westminster and Vancouver Tramway Company went bankrupt. Edmonds lost his money. So did many others. But the electric railway was bought out by other investors over time, eventually becoming the BC Electric Railway. The BC Electric, of course, is bought out by BC Hydro eventually, and becomes and then the right-of-way for the interurban becomes the right-of-way for the SkyTrain much later on. Yeah.
I'm sorry, this is a Vancouver question.
Yes, I hope we can answer it.
Well, I'm really intrigued. I know it's been sort of squashed side to side, but I'm really intrigued at how long Falls Creek is.
Right. Yes. So they do fill in.
How far east did it come?
I think pretty close to Clark.
Okay.
Yeah. Right? Do we agree with that? I do know the Vancouver Historical Atlas there, the lovely Derek Hayes' publication, which is laying flat on the table, will definitely have a map to tell you that. But yeah, it's an amazing story to think of those kinds of changes that people are making. But you're right, you can definitely see that happening in this map. So 1891, the railway is built, and it's not meant to serve Burnaby, but the powerhouse is located in Burnaby. So this is the powerhouse, located today Griffiths Avenue area. I think there's still a substation where that powerhouse used to be. Yes, you know it?
Oh, yeah, because I live right near it.
Okay.
So they have a big plaque on a cement right behind the powerhouse.
Yes. Okay.
Powerhouse.
Right, yeah. Where you can see it.
Read all about it.
Fantastic. So this is the powerhouse in 1893, and also where the interurbans would stay, overnight when they weren't operating. And there was a boarding house run by Roderick and Minnie Sample that was right across the road from the powerhouse. So you may wonder, in 1893, where did they get the electricity to run an electric railway? So they actually generated the electricity from steam power. So they burnt wood to make steam, and then the steam was run through an electric generator, and that would create the electricity. So not a particularly efficient process, but that's where it came from until 1907, I'm going to say, when the Bunsen Lake power station was eventually built. The Bunsen Lake power station was built. But in 1893, they're generating it with wood, and a lot of those woodcutters were Chinese Canadian or Chinese citizens who were living in Burnaby, Chinese migrants who were here and were working as woodcutters. But 1891, anyways, the railway comes through. So in 1892, Burnaby is incorporated. This is not a coincidence. So people want there to be a municipal government because now that there's a railway, there's transportation, there's people moving through, there's opportunities to subdivide your lots and to cash in on your land investment, but you need some type of local government to be able to subdivide your land and to build roads and to deliver services and all of those kinds of things. So 1892, Burnaby is incorporated, and this is the first municipal council on the steps of Sample's boarding house. So this is that boarding house right across from the power station where the people who worked on the electric railway could come and stay and live. And so it really just illustrates how close that first municipal council is tied to that electric railway. And in fact, they used to have their council meetings fairly frequently at the boarding house. So it was sort of like a de facto municipal hall in the early days. And throughout the 1890s, there was a lot of logging happening in Burnaby. This is a Gilly Brothers operation. So you can see this little steam donkey here. So what would happen in Burnaby is that large trees would be felled, and then they would use these steam donkeys, which you burned wood. Again, you're logging. There's lots of wood. You burn wood to make the steam, and the steam engine is like a winch to pull the logs through the forest, or you could tie it to a tree so it could pull itself through the forest. So they would pull the logs to the edges of that big basin of Burnaby and then drag them down or push them down, or often send them in creeks and streams, temporarily dam creeks and streams to build the water up and then release the dam, and then the logs would go rushing down. So they used Burnaby's geography to log the community. So when you see settlers, like this is the Love family who came in 1893 as well, when you see the sky in the background, so you can see what the loggers left behind. It looks like a forest fire, it looks like a wasteland. You see these types of landscapes throughout Burnaby, and then settlers would have to remove what was left behind. But of course it also offered a living to those Chinese woodcutters that I mentioned a few moments ago, who could also come and salvage this wood and sell it to the BC Electric, or sell it at the Fraser River to the paddle wheeler boats who did the same thing. They'd pick up wood to run their steam engines. So we have the logging happening, we have the electric railway happening, and then we have farmers like the Love family who are coming in and starting to settle and grow food in Burnaby as well. This is in East Burnaby on Cumberland. And the Love family's farmhouse is actually, it changed over the years. It doesn't look like that anymore. But it's now at the Burnaby Village Museum. It's one of our buildings that's preserved there. Okay. Where am I? The Love family. Yeah, so this is the Municipal Hall was built in 1911. 1911. Municipal Hall is built at Edmonds and Kingsway. So that Edmonds and Kingsway area really is kind of the town center. It is the center of Burnaby at that time. Sorry, people of North Burnaby, but no, it is that area at that time. And there's a bit of a real estate boom that happens kind of between 1909, 1911, and Burnaby kind of it starts developing. There's another interurban line built, this time through central Burnaby. It's called the Burnaby Lake line, and its right of way eventually becomes the Highway 1 through Burnaby. So that space that is Highway 1 now was an interurban line that again connected Vancouver to New Westminster through Burnaby. The land was much boggier there.
Further than New Westminster.
Well, once you were at New Westminster, you could connect to, you could go out to Chilliwack. Yeah, yeah. But it was a separate train.
Hastings train into Irvine, or was it?
Yeah, and then eventually on Hastings Street, there's a streetcar. So it's called an interurban when it goes through more than one community, but if it only operates, although that doesn't really work for Hastings because it does go into Vancouver. But the streetcars are also smaller. Yeah. They make a lot more local stops. They have a different kind of wheelbase, so they're easier to move around the corners and such. Yeah, Terry.
There is a DVD available through the Transit Union. It shows all the tram lines, and it's narrated all the way from Vancouver, all the way to Chilliwack, and from Vancouver over to Stevenson.
Yeah. Yeah, we show that in the tram barn at the museum.
Why First Avenue is as wide as it is?
Yes.
Because that's where the tram line went.
Yes, yeah, so that boulevard is kind of a leftover from that era, absolutely. I love that when the history is still there, you can see it if you're looking for it, right? It's really neat.
The streetcar from Vancouver, just another site.
Okay.
The streetcar from Vancouver ended at Boundary. Just throw a switch, and it backed into a little alcove.
Yeah.
Threw another switch, and it went back downtown. But waiting for you at Boundary Road would be what they call just a little trolley. It was a double-ender. Yeah. And that took you up to almost to Holdham Avenue and Capitol Hill. And it was, all the guy did, until he got to Capitol Hill, he just picked the controls up, went to the other end of the tram and put them in and threw a switch and brought it back to Boundary again.
Yes. Yes, you're right. You're right. To Ellesmere. Ellesmere, I think, was the terminus. Yeah.
The two brothers that ran that were our soccer coaches.
Oh, really? Okay. Fantastic. Yes. So that is very fun. So certainly by kind of 1911, 1912, we have the Municipal Hall, we have a police force, there are schools being built, there are business districts developing, and there's the Burnaby Lake interurban line. Not long after that is, I think 1913 is the year that the Hastings Street streetcar extension is built. So the community is starting to grow, although interrupted, of course, by the First World War. And Burnaby is becoming kind of a suburb. This is the Highlands, what's called the Highland Park subdivision. This image is from around 1912. So sorry, it's not so easy to see, but this is the BC Electric Railway route right around Royal Oak. And this is the type of advertisement that you would see: choice residential sites cleared, and they're letting people know they can purchase, small-ish blocks of land in walking distance to that electric railway. So Burnaby has commuters in 1912 or earlier, right? So this whole idea where Burnaby is a place where a family can come, as it kind of talks about here, it's just a residential site. There isn't a house, so people can come, they can build their own home, they have space for a garden, and it's really a town for working people. And often the breadwinner is commuting out of the community to Vancouver or New Westminster, and a wife and children are left behind in Burnaby, kids going to school, and then trying to kind of stretch the dollar by having maybe a cow, some chickens. So there was a lot of kind of backyard agriculture happening in Burnaby too. Although there were also large estates. Of course, this is Fair Acres, which is now the Burnaby Art Gallery, which was built in 1913 by Grace and Henry, this photo is from 1913. It was built in 1911 by Grace and Henry separately. So that Deer Lake area was sort of a exclusive suburb for very wealthy folks from Vancouver until till the First World War, when there's kind of just before the First World War, there's an economic downturn, and a lot of those folks lose their homes. It becomes kind of a more modest, not modest, but a more modest neighborhood after the Second World War. By the 1920s, Burnaby is the third largest municipality in British Columbia. It has a fairly diversified economy, and we're seeing institutions like the C4 School here being constructed, a little one-room schoolhouse that was on Government Road in 1922. So Burnaby develops quickly through the 1920s. The municipality also starts incurring a lot of debt in the 1920s to build roads and infrastructure to support the booming population, and that becomes a problem when the Great Depression hits in the 1930s. So Burnaby is hit really hard by the Depression. We actually had the highest unemployment rate in the country at one time. By the spring of 1932, a third of the adult population was unemployed, and half of Burnaby's property owners could not pay their taxes. So this municipality that was already in debt was in dire straits. It was a terrible time for Burnaby. And at that time, there was not the kind of social safety net by the provincial or federal government. So local governments were expected to provide relief for the poor. And so Burnaby started borrowing more money. To put people to work as relief workers, building infrastructure. A lot of Central Park was cleared at that time, for example. So there was a lot of public works that happened, but the municipality was going further and further and further into debt, and revenue was decreasing all of the time with problems with taxes. So one thing the people of Burnaby did was they elected a very left of center outspoken mayor called a Reeve at that time. The man on the left is Reeve William Pritchard. He was a Capitol Hill resident and a very well-known kind of radical person on the Canadian scene. He'd actually been jailed for his role in the Winnipeg General Strike in 1919. The only person jailed who wasn't even at the Winnipeg General Strike. It was his opinions that he expressed in writing. He was charged with sedition. And he attempted to kind of hold the municipality together, but eventually they defaulted on a payment to the provincial government, and Burnaby essentially went bankrupt. The provincial government established an administrator to look after Burnaby's affairs, and that administrator was in place until, I'm going to say it's 1941. It might be 1942. So Burnaby kind of lost its autonomy for a while there. And the average people of Burnaby were hit very hard. So this man in the center is a man named Tom Irvine. His house is at the Burnaby Village Museum. He built his house himself in 1911. He worked as a pile driver on a lot of large infrastructure projects in British Columbia. Very hardworking man, and he lost his home to the municipality. The municipality had to seize his home because of unpaid taxes in the 1930s. So what they would do for people like Mr. Irvine is you could then rent your house back from the city. You had a lifetime tenancy at your house. So the municipality actually amassed a lot of property during the 1930s, and including this little house. So eventually, when after Mr. Irvine moved, because he lived to be 100 years old, so eventually when he moved out, the municipality found that they owned this very old little 1911 bachelor's cottage, and they weren't sure what to do with it, and they gave it to the Burnaby Village Museum. So that's kind of how Mr. Irvine's story follows through. But yeah, so the 1930s definitely was not a time of growth in Burnaby, though I think it did establish some aspects of our political culture that remain to this day. In particular, you may know that the city of Burnaby will not carry a debt. The city will not borrow money any longer. So, and I do think that value kind of goes back to this time when they got themselves into so much trouble that they lost complete control of the local government. Yeah.
How could he not pay his taxes when he was hard working?
Well, he lost his job during the Depression. Yeah, people just lost it. And a lot of, like, this, in Vancouver, for example, Vancouver Industries would give the priority to Vancouver people to have Vancouver jobs. Or in New Westminster, it's the same thing. New Westminster people would get the jobs first. And Burnaby just didn't have a lot of that same level of industry. It was kind of a suburban, was much more suburban.
Isn't that when Chevron was invited in?
Well, yes. So the other thing that happens during the Depression, both Pritchard starts it and then the provincial administrators continue it, is that they start inviting large industry in and giving them sweetheart deals.
Like our beach.
Yes, like Chevron. Was Ford Motor Company came in and established itself where the Metrotown Mall was, brought in by the provincial administrator. So a lot of that big heavy industry does come into Burnaby in the 1930s in this attempt to diversify the economy. A successful attempt, actually. We continue to have quite a diverse economy today. But yeah, that definitely is what happens. This is what happens. And then after the war, Burnaby really booms. Jim Wolfe, kind of a local historian who works in our planning department here, has termed this era the Burnaboom era. So after the Second World War, Burnaby grows quite rapidly. So in 1941, the population is just over 30,000. And 20 years later, it's over 100,000. So the population triples in 20 years after the Second World War. So this whole idealized life of living in the suburbs is kind of comes true in Burnaby. So that the top picture is the first kind of suburban development as we think of it in Burnaby, Willingdon Heights, which is here in North Burnaby. And 550 houses were built in Willingdon Heights. I just have to look at my dates. In about 18 months, anyways, in about 18 months. It was 120 acres of land that was sold. 550 homes were built, and they were sold. They were sold to veterans. We've been looking into this a little. I can't say conclusively that this is the case, but I think a lot of them sold to veterans and then sold again quite quickly. So there was kind of a priority to sell homes to veterans. Got first priority, but I think there were a lot of people whose lives had been on hold through the 1930s and maybe had good jobs in war industries, maybe weren't veterans but had good jobs during the Second World War and wanted to buy a home, wanted to have a family. They'd been waiting. Everyone had been waiting. So places like Willingdon Heights. And there were lots of these developments in Burnaby. And I suspect, again, we haven't put all the pieces together yet, but I suspect that because of all that land that was lost to tax sales in the 1930s, I suspect there were large blocks of land in Burnaby that could then become subdivisions and could become parts of veterans' land. But we haven't quite put the pieces together on that yet.
That was at a time when my dad, who had gone to work at Broad Dry Dock at the beginning of the war, built the house on Georgia Street that I'm living in right now.
Okay.
And at that time, because materials were short and going into the war effort, you were only allowed to build the utility half a year.
Right. Okay.
And then you could add the other half on if the war got finished.
Right. Right.
Luckily it did, or I'd still be living above the street.
Yes. Right. Well, and I think, you know, after the war, that's when I talked about that Highland Park subdivision before, where the model was you bought an empty lot and you built your own house like Dad did. And then after the Second World War, it's more of a developed subdivision where you're buying a house that looks like your neighbor's house. Yes.
And what did they cost at that time?
Oh, I'm not sure what they cost. It's a really good question. The 120 acres sold for around $60,000. 550 homes. Yeah. It's pretty incredible. It's pretty incredible. Yeah. Yeah, different developers would purchase it. And then the CMHC funding was coming into place because people didn't really have mortgages either before the Second World War. The mortgage is more of a post-war invention.
You had a developer builder, you built it yourself, and then you bought the property off of some land speculator and I know my uncle,
Yeah.
they bought a house or built a house after he was in the Air Force in Capitol Hill.
Okay.
They lived in it until, I don't know, 80.
Yeah. Yeah, you can still buy a vacant lot, but definitely the trend is starting to happen where most new development is happening in a suburban development
At
form.
that time,
Yeah.
my dad bought the lot, and he paid $300 for the lot,
Right?
and they tried to talk him into buying 2 lots, like right next door.
You're right. Yes.
And for $500.
Right.
And he said, "You got to be joking! Look at all the bush you got to clear." So we didn't get 2 lots.
Yes.
But are you going to talk about the Vancouver Heights?
I wasn't going to talk about the Vancouver Heights.
So just a
Yeah.
side on that.
Yeah.
The Vancouver Heights was, again, land speculators
Yeah.
were bought because the land was so much higher and you had a view of all of Vancouver, and they sold those lots for exorbitant prices
Yeah.
by calling it the Heights.
Yes.
Which is now, when you look at it, it's called the Burnaby Heights.
Yes.
But originally it was the Vancouver Heights.
Yeah, so this is the northwest quadrant of, not the whole quadrant, but the 160 acre, I guess, parcel it would have been. No, further west of Capitol
Capitol
Hill.
Hill is just that logging.
It's between Capitol Hill and Boundary.
Yeah, Capitol Hill was more of a working class kind of smaller homes, but Vancouver Heights was more grand homes. And of course, yeah, they called it Vancouver Heights to emphasize that it was so close to Vancouver. You're practically in Vancouver. You're not in Burnaby. And it was the Heights. Yeah. And we still do this, right? Like the Coquitlam, the hot real estate in Coquitlam is the Westwood Plateau, right? There's still this kind of emphasis, this real estate emphasis on higher land. Burke Mountain, right? Burke Mountain. It's kind of a hill. So that kind of area where this subdivision was, kind of between Lougheed and Hastings, was just kind of scrubby land. There were a few farms or unused lots, and then after the Second World War, it really is one of those areas where a lot of the suburban kind of housing developments like this, and you can still see these houses. Like if you go and walk that neighborhood, you can still see these houses. They've been modified or added onto or have different stucco, but you can, there's fewer and fewer, and there's a slightly different view in the background of towers, but you can still see them there. You can. And then once the subdivisions are in there, then services start arriving to support them. So this Hooper's Appliances was on Hastings Street, so I just kind of love this little advertisement for an electric stove, because these houses were advertised as being fully electric, and you could purchase an electric stove or an electric refrigerator or an electric washing machine, and this was really the arrival of modern living.
So
Yeah.
the electric, so pre-electric would have been wood stove heating, that sort of thing. I'm looking-
Yeah.
Oh,
Yes.
oh, okay.
A lot of sawdust. A lot of people burn sawdust in Burnaby.
And then we got
Yeah.
sawdust.
Yeah.
If you think you got pollution now, you should have seen it.
Well, yeah. I can imagine. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, definitely, people didn't want to let go of those wood stoves because you could heat your house with it. You could cook with it. And even places that had electricity, like, it would be out for days on end. It wasn't particularly reliable until into the 40s and 50s in Burnaby. And I mean, there's parts of BC that doesn't even have it until into the 60s or 70s. But yeah, so I really like that little ad, and you can't see it from here, but they're advertising that that the store hosts workshops, I guess you would call them, presentations from the BC Electric Service Center. So these were people that the BC Electric would send out because they sold appliances so that people would use more electricity. So the BC Electric would send around, they were mostly a group of women who would go to appliance stores and places like that and teach women how to cook on an electric stove. So, so this store is going to host one of these people and come and teach everyone how to use their electric stove. And then the mall. Brentwood Mall. So 1961, Brentwood Mall opened. And this photo is from the grocery store that was there, which I was totally surprised to find out was a Loblaws. I thought Loblaws was kind of a more modern arrival in British Columbia, but there was actually a Loblaws at Brentwood Mall in 1961. And they had kind of a series of publicity photos. I'm not sure if the ladies of Burnaby Heights actually shopped in a dress and heels, but maybe they did. But this is one of their promotional stories. And that clerk looks exactly like my mother. It's eerie. It's eerie. But yeah, so Burnaby is definitely growing in the 1960s. We also see drive-ins, right? You probably remember the drive-ins. You worked at one?
I worked at the Low-E.
Okay.
Yeah.
So that would be close to this area,
the
too.
Drive-in had little lights on the top of the speaker box. And if you wanted something from the concession stand,
Oh.
light on, and a kid would come to your door and say, "What can I get you, sir?"
Right.
So what you did, if you saw a car kind of moving around a bit, whether the light was on or not,
Right.
you'd go for a bang on the light.
Right. Burnaby General Hospital was opened in 1952, and the Municipal in Central Burnaby was opened in 1956 to kind of ease that north-south divide. And definitely what happens is there's more population, land values also increase significantly. So there's a much larger tax base in Burnaby, and that's when we start seeing parks and recreation centers and swimming pools and Burnaby Village Museum in 1971. So through the 60s and the 70s, there's this kind of investment in the good life in Burnaby, but it's paid in cash.
Libraries are 61 years old now, so it was 56.
Yeah.
But the McGill branch started out, as you said, on Hastings Street earlier than that. I think it's almost 90 now. So
Okay.
McGill branch was much earlier.
Yeah.
Because North Burnaby was still.
But it probably would have been like a volunteer
It was.
organization, where by the 50s and the 60s you're getting much like a much larger government.
If
Yes.
you go into the McGill library,
Yeah.
you walk around to the back where the washrooms are.
Yes,
On that
yes.
wall is a picture of the original house
Yeah.
that was Mrs. McGill, who there was.
Okay.
Mrs.
There was McGill.
That was her
Okay.
house, and she started the library.
Okay. Fantastic. Okay, now I know. I learned something. I learned a few things. And then the 1960s also brought public investment. So I talked about that the local government is investing in roads. There's finally sewer systems in Burnaby. And there's water systems, there's more electricity, there's community centers, there's all of that kind of infrastructure that we know about. There's also investment by other levels of government. So we see the BC Institute of Technology open in the 60s, and Simon Fraser University, of course. The Trans-Canada Highway comes through. So the community is definitely becoming modern in the 60s and 70s. And the municipality also adopts this kind of town center idea, where they divide the community into these 4 quadrants, and they designate 4 areas that are going to be for high density development. That's Brentwood, Lougheed, and Metrotown in 1966, and then Edmonds not until 1987. But the idea is that these will be transportation hubs, that you'll focus services there, and you'll zone for high density development in those areas, so that you're focusing growth in those town centers. It's not a coincidence, there's a library in each of those town centers. So they're focusing growth in those town centers and putting less pressure on green space. So 25% of Burnaby is parks and green space, partly because that model kind of allowed that to happen. Yeah.
So was that town center idea a Burnaby idea or a Metro idea?
I think it's a Metro. I think Burnaby, it's hard to say because Burnaby has incredible role in the establishment of, well, then the GVRD. Yeah. So the Burnaby is very influential in the GVRD. Mayor, Reeve, and then later Mayor Alan Emmett in Burnaby is chair of the GVRD during this period. So it's kind of hard to say. Yeah, but definitely Metrotown is a kind of, I think, is kind of the first large-scale implementation of this that we see. And so today we call Metrotown a regional town center. The others are town centers, but Metrotown is the regional town center.
That's the big driving idea now throughout Greater Bay.
Yeah, everybody's doing it now. Yes, yeah,
But would
yeah.
you say that our geography lends itself to that because
Yes.
they're all isolated anyway? So why
Yes,
not?
yes, yeah, absolutely. Geography and that history of all of these roads that move through and divide the community into those 4 quadrants. So geography and history, and then also policy help. And again, although I can't prove it, I think that Depression era aspect too, where the city controls, the municipality controls so much land after the Second World War that unlike other municipalities, they have a lot more ability to create land use policy, I think, than others do. But we're still trying to piece that together. That's what I suspect. Oh, no. I had another slide. That's so upsetting. So the slide that I am missing is something that was brought up in the conversation earlier, which was how did Burnaby become this incredibly diverse community that it is? So Burnaby is defined now as a hyper-diverse or a super-diverse city. The Vancouver Sun did what they called a diversity index. So what they did was they calculated if you were to randomly select 2 people in the community, what are the chances that they would belong to 2 different ethnic groups? And Burnaby had the highest, you had a 73% chance in Burnaby that you would belong to different cultural groups randomly selected. That's higher than Richmond, it's the highest in the Metro Vancouver area. Because while other communities such as Richmond have a higher proportion of people who do, so the way the census kind of figures this is what's your mother tongue. So they have the highest percentage of people with a mother tongue that isn't French or English. However, there's a block of Chinese language speaking people in Richmond, where Burnaby, there's much more diversity across the board. So it's an incredibly diverse community. And in Edmonds, that number gets into, I think it's 82, 83% chance that 2 randomly selected people would be of different cultural groups. So how does this happen? How does this happen in Burnaby? It's hard to say. Why? I don't think I know the reason to that. I think we're really curious to know. It definitely has happened in the last 20 to 30 years. Canada overall has experienced high levels of immigration and high levels of immigration from countries beyond Europe. A lot of that population has come to the Lower Mainland, and a lot of it has come to Burnaby. Yeah.
Maybe because of the industrialization in Burnaby, where there was so much went on along Broad Inlet and along the along the tram lines there. It was all industrials. People would go where the jobs were. And the tram line came right up to Vancouver along Commercial Drive. And there was a steel mill, as you might remember the talk, at foot of Alpha Street, where I worked. Yeah. And you talk about a United Nations, the lunchroom. You could have tried any food you wanted to there.
Okay.
And that's one of the reasons. And they went to where the jobs were, and then eventually ended up moving out of the Commercial Drive area and coming up and living in Burnaby. Right. That could be one of the reasons.
Yeah, I imagine affordability is a factor. Compared to Vancouver, Burnaby is a more affordable community. Probably a lot of those services that we all valued, services for seniors, services for families, recreation centers, probably those amenities, the transportation, all of the SkyTrain routes and that ability to move around the community would have influenced. But in the 1970s, Burnaby is not a particularly diverse community. So it's a pretty recent phenomena. It's interesting. I also suspect, again, I don't know, we haven't put the pieces together on this, but when the interurban, when the BC Electric, actually it's BC Hydro at that point, pulls out, there's this whole deal industrialization that happens in Burnaby. So the BC Electric pulls out, the interurban lines are closed down. There's a lot of empty warehouses. This is part of why the film industry comes in. There's all these empty warehouses that they can situate themselves in. Bridge Studios, empty warehouse. Used to be industry, then industry disappears, and then this new industry comes. So I suspect there's a lot of affordable retail space, storefronts, and places where someone new to Canada can open a business and make a living. So you look at places like 6th Street, where that streetcar used to be, and when you walk along that street, every store has a sign in a different language. There's this incredibly diverse business community there. So I kind of suspect that's part of the story too. But you're right. Where is there a job? Where can I afford to live? Yeah, I'm sure is a factor. But yeah, so Burnaby is this kind of incredibly diverse community today. Is where we have arrived at. So, yeah.
When was the last reeve and the first mayor?
I can't remember. It's the 60s, 70s.
That's my childhood. So.
Yeah. I'm sure it's Googleable. Yeah. I don't know. Yeah. Yeah. So those of you who lived in the community for a long time, how have you noticed that it went from a fairly not diverse community to a diverse community? You agree, kind of 80s, 90s is the tipping point. Right. Okay. Yeah. Yeah.
We welcomed the world and they came.
And about Vancouver diversified.
Yeah, but there's also that SkyTrain. The SkyTrain's also built, and Metrotown Town Center, more housing in that type of area, perhaps. After Expo, yeah. Okay. Great. Okay, any questions or other stories folks want to share? Yeah.
The museum should be thinking about getting some of those houses to the 40s.
Yeah. Yes, we're pretty landlocked because of we're surrounded by road right-of-ways, and there's a creek that runs the Deer Lake Brook that connects Deer Lake and Burnaby Lake. So a lot of our buildings, actually, they wouldn't let us put them there.
Nothing says you could
now.
put a corner of a house and leave the house where it is and have that part.
Yes. Yeah.
Ways around this, but
Yeah. There's
that is part of Burnaby's history.
or preserving some of the post-war history in place. Yeah. You should write to the people who live here, should write to the Community Heritage Commission and nominate some of that architecture.
And the Seaforth School that you showed,
Yeah.
is that in the museum?
It is. Yeah. That little school came to the museum. Yeah.
Government Street.
Yeah.
Is it called Government Street? Do you know? Was there government buildings on that street?
You know, I don't know why it was called Irvine Street. It's strange. I don't know why.
Seaforth School is on it.
It is in that area. Seaforth was.
Seaforth is one block up from the government.
Yeah, I'm not totally sure, but it's definitely in that area. Yeah, Terry knows.
In that area, it was called Lockdale.
Or Lozells.
Lodell or Lockdale.
Okay.
Or Lozelle.
Yeah. 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 And it doesn't get kind of public services like public sewer and water and such until quite late. So that I think that's part of what happens in that neighborhood is there's big lots, and then until well after the Second World War.
That's what you were saying last week, how the sewage went into the lake for a long time.
Yes. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Yes, the lack of services there meant a lot of pollution going into the lake.
The water used to be Levack's mushroom farm down on the right-hand side where I think the Salvation Army's in there now.
Okay.
It's quite an area.
Yeah.
Get through everything.
There was a lot of farming, right? Or like, and not just like farming in a field, like industrial farming, like chicken ranches and mushroom farms and large greenhouses. There was a lot of that kind of agriculture. Yeah.
Where the Paramount Drive-In used to be a mink farm.
A mink farm. Yeah, or sometimes people just had like a few mink. Like those kind of, that story that I was telling about, the husband would commute off and the wife stayed at home. It wasn't just in the 20s, that was still happening in the 40s and the 50s and the 60s, and some people were doing that with mink. Yeah.
I went to school with the son.
Okay. Was he actually a hooper?
Yeah.
Okay.
I think he was part of that family.
Okay. Yeah, those little kind of mom and pop shops.
Burnaby North,
Okay.
which the original Burnaby North was Rosser Avenue School now, But that was the original Burnaby North.
Right.
Then they became Burnaby Heights, and then they moved out,
And then they moved out.
changed 3 times.
Okay, yeah. Because after the Second World War, their school populations just skyrocketed too, right? Like I think there were schools that had more than one shift of students just to keep them going. Yeah.
What about the Shell Oil Refinery and Standard Oil and all that? That all happened and how?
I don't know enough about all the details to speak definitively about that, but they are part of that large industry that is brought in the 30s to. That's when it sort of starts. Although there was oil being delivered to storage areas at like Barnett, what is now Barnett Marine Park. There was oil holding facilities there and distribution areas and that type of thing. So oil and gas has been here for a long time. But I think those large refineries come in more in the 1930s. Yeah, but the tank farm 50s, I think.
50s, I think I've heard 50s.
Yeah.
You mean the one at the base of Raymond?
Yeah, the one that they want to build the pipeline to now. Yeah. Yeah. Yes. Okay. All right. Great. Well, thank you everybody for coming out on a cold and rainy night. That's great. I learned a lot.
Se nos brought in today, Jones.